So, will you join with me in prayer as we begin to reflect on these words today? May these words that I speak be grounded in my soul, encouraged by the God presence in me. And may these words you hear be captured by your soul and enlivened by the God presence in you. Amen. Thomas Berry was another of those marvelous Catholic priests in the tradition of Teilhard de Chardin, whose curiosity and intellect took us to whole new ways of seeing ourselves and our world. At the last board meeting, I did the opening devotional, and in it I quoted Berry. And I'd like to begin this morning's reflection by turning back to that statement from Thomas Berry. He speaks of the microphase and macrophase of any religious tradition. During its microphase, he says, when it is still very young, and when its particular gifts for the world are just forming, the tradition needs to protect its uniqueness by well-defined boundaries. It's like a newly planted sapling that requires protection in order to grow. During that microphase, the blessings of the tradition are primarily for those who come within its well-defined boundaries. Those who belong to the tradition benefit from its particular graces and ministrations. During a religion's macrophase, however, when it has grown up, when it is well established, a religious tradition can offer its blessings freely to the world. Richard Rohr, another creative, imaginative Catholic priest, by the way, says the same thing about human individuals. He says that in our early adulthood, we're about establishing ourselves, getting an education, starting a career, getting married, buying a house, starting a family. All of that is the work of early adulthood. But as we are established in all of these pursuits, the second stage of adulthood is to look beyond ourselves and our immediate circle to find a wider and a deeper meaning for life. We ourselves move into the macrophase, as it were. The book that I was using for the devotional, the one in which Thomas Berry was quoted, went on to say that it's time for Christianity to enter its macrophase. We are a mature faith. It's time for us to start offering our blessings to the world. That, of course, raises its own questions. How are we going to survive as a religious tradition if we are about offering ourselves freely to the world and not demanding some sort of commitment to the institution? That's a question that we are facing in the United Church right now, as we see our numbers diminish and the average age of our members and adherents moving ever upward. Institutional survival is becoming an ever greater anxiety as we watch the relentless projection of statistical trends. I have no crystal ball to call on to put our anxieties to rest. I do know that one of the ways we have of trying to cope with our dilemma is to try and reestablish the microphase, to try and return to those well-defined boundaries of belonging, and to broadcast the benefits offered to those who belong. That's one way that we have of coping with it, but I don't believe that it'll work. I've never felt that turning back to the past will be life-giving to us or to the world. And institutional preservation has never been a command of Jesus. Discipleship and ministry to the world was the command in this morning's scripture reading, typical of Jesus' example and of his teachings. So I guess the only answer we can give to that question of institutional survival is to move forward, trusting that if we answer our call with integrity and commitment, then whatever happens to the world and to us will be life-giving. The other question that comes to mind as we wonder about entering the macro phase that Barry talks about is, what does it mean to grow into the maturity of our Christhood and to make our offering freely to the world? What are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to act? What's demanded of us? And this is what has led me to this reflection on this Canada Day weekend. I don't want to begin with the question, what are we supposed to do? I want to rephrase the question as, what have we been doing? Because I believe that in many ways, we have been making our offerings freely to the world. I've talked before here, from this place, about the events that have happened since 2015, when the Canadian government made the commitment to sponsor 25,000 Syrian refugees. Many of the privately sponsored refugees were sponsored by churches, such as the refugees that we sponsored. But the churches also encouraged and advised many other private sponsorships, because the churches have had the rich experience of sponsoring refugees. In the 1960s, Lester Pearson urged the United Church to be louder in voicing the values that were important to all. 60 years later, Canadians were again turning to the church for guidance on how to live out our values as we opened our borders to refugees. For another example, Canada is seen as one of the most open and affirming countries in the world towards LGBT folks. Although it's impossible to know the role that the church has played in the Canadian attitude towards LGBT people, we can say that the United Church was offering religious covenant services for the same-sex couples long before such unions were made legal in Canada. The struggle to be compassionate and just in relationship to the gay community very nearly destroyed us in the 1980s. But it was a public struggle. People heard about it in the media. And I can't help but think that we raised the issue to prominence for a great many Canadians, and so helped to shape the attitudes that make Canada what it is today towards the LGBT community. It was 30 years ago this year that the United Church made an apology to the Indigenous peoples for our shameful complicity in the residential schools. That was long before it was on the radar for many Canadians, most Canadians. But I believe that we played an important role in putting this issue to the public and in helping Canada to begin to face up to our responsibilities. The kind of response that many Indigenous people have been making towards the 150th anniversary of Confederation this year shows that the issue is really only beginning to be prominent in Canada. But I believe that we, as the United Church, are in a position to continue to bring leadership to the discussions, actions, and decisions ahead. I raise these examples to show the path we have already been walking. If Thomas Berry talks about offering our blessings freely to the world, then I think these are ways in which we have already entered this macro phase. We enter this phase with somber hearts, because we wonder what energy we have to continue. And we long, and we wonder how long we have left as a denomination to do what we are called to do. I'm not diminishing the presence of the younger members of our congregation here and in the whole United Church, including the children who are very much a part of our community. You fill our lives with joy, and you give us a cause for hope. In Matthew's Gospel, which was today's scripture, Jesus says to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Pray therefore, the Lord of the harvest send out laborers into his harvest." And then he called out the 12 disciples and gave them authority. And they were few, but they were enough. And we are few, but perhaps we are enough. If we are to look to the past, it needs to be to remember and honor all those who were disciples and prophets in their day, and to take courage from them to accomplish our mission. I believe that this is the message we need to carry with us as Christians, as members and adherents of the United Church of Canada on this 150th anniversary of Confederation. I invite you to reflect for just a few moments on how you respond to those words.